So you're sitting there thinking about nuclear war with Russia, right? Well, let's be real, nuclear war is like a game of chess played with doomsday devices. The United States has spent decades building its nuclear strategy, not just for show, but because the stakes are so high that even a single miscalculation could lead to the end of civilization as we know it. This isn't about Hollywood action movies. This is about real-world planning and the kind of thinking that goes into making sure we don't accidentally trigger World War III. The US has always had a plan, but what exactly does that plan look like when faced with a potential nuclear threat from Russia? It's not just about having missiles or bombs, it's about strategy, deterrence, and the ability to respond in a way that minimizes casualties and maximizes survival. Think of it as a massive, complex puzzle where every piece has to fit perfectly, and if even one part is wrong, the whole thing could fall apart. Now, you might be wondering, why Russia? Well, for starters, they're one of the few countries with the nuclear capability to match the US in both quantity and quality. Plus, their military modernization efforts have been on a roll, which means they're not just sitting back and waiting for the US to make the first move. This is about maintaining balance, ensuring that neither side has an advantage that could lead to a full-scale nuclear exchange. But here's the catch. Nuclear deterrence isn't just about having more missiles or better technology. It's also about communication, trust, and understanding. The US relies on a system of mutual assured destruction, MAD, which basically means that if one side launches a nuclear attack, the other can retaliate with such force that it would be too destructive for anyone to survive. It's like saying, if you mess with me, I'll make sure your day is even worse. Of course, this isn't just about having the firepower. It's also about knowing when to use it and when not to. The US has invested heavily in early warning systems, missile defense technologies, and even cyber capabilities to detect and neutralize threats before they escalate. It's a whole ecosystem of military planning that's constantly evolving, adapting to new threats, and trying to stay one step ahead of potential adversaries. Nuclear deterrence is like a giant game of chicken played with thermonuclear weapons, where both sides try to convince the other that they're so dangerous nobody wants to start anything. It's not about winning or losing. It's about making sure neither side actually does anything because the consequences are too catastrophic. Think of it as the ultimate bluff. I have a gun, and if you do something stupid, I'll shoot you. But with nuclear weapons, the gun is so big that even thinking about pulling the trigger makes everyone nervous. The core idea behind deterrence is simple. If one country has enough nuclear weapons to destroy the other, it's less likely to attack in the first place. It's based on a principle called mutual assured destruction, MAD, which sounds like a bad movie title but actually describes a very real strategy. If Russia attacks the US can retaliate with such devastating force that Russia would suffer unimaginable losses. This mutual threat creates an invisible shield of fear, keeping both sides from escalating into full-blown war. But here's the catch. Nuclear deterrence isn't foolproof. It relies on communication, trust, and a shared understanding that neither side wants to be the first to strike. If one country misinterprets another's actions or if there's a breakdown in communication, like a false alarm or a mistaken message, the entire system could collapse in an instant. Imagine if a weather balloon was mistaken for a missile. In a nuclear context, that confusion could lead to unthinkable consequences. To make deterrence work, both the US and Russia have elaborate systems in place to monitor each other's movements and communicate effectively during crises. These include early warning satellites, radar networks, and even direct lines of communication between leaders, like the hotline that connects Washington and Moscow. The idea is to prevent misunderstandings from escalating into real conflict by ensuring that both sides can talk through any potential crisis before it turns into a war. Yet, nuclear deterrence also has its downsides. It creates a constant state of tension, where every move one country makes could be seen as a threat by the other. This arms race leads to an ever-growing stockpile of weapons and a never-ending cycle of technological advancements aimed at outdoing the opponent. In some ways, it's like a competition between two children who keep adding more toys to their collection. Not because they want to play, but because they're afraid the other will win. When we think about the US plan in case of a nuclear war with Russia, it's impossible to ignore the shadow of the Cold War. That was a time when the world held its breath, knowing that one misstep could lead to Armageddon. The United States and the Soviet Union were locked in a deadly dance of mutual suspicion, each building up their arsenals like two sides of a knife waiting for a trigger. It wasn't just about power. It was about fear, propaganda, and the ever-present threat of annihilation. The Cold War taught US that nuclear strategy isn't just about bombs. It's about deterrence, brinkmanship, and the psychological warfare that plays out in secret meetings and public speeches alike. The US developed a doctrine called mutual assured destruction, or MAD, which basically said if you nuke me, I'll nuke you back with such force that neither side would survive. It was a brutal game of chicken where both sides had to pretend they weren't afraid, even as the stakes were unimaginably high. But it wasn't just about building more missiles and bombs. The Cold War also gave us nuclear submarines, stealth bombers, and an entire infrastructure built around the idea that a surprise attack could end everything in minutes. Think of it like a game of Russian roulette with a loaded gun. Everyone knows the rules, but no one wants to be the one who pulls the trigger. And yet, for decades, both sides kept playing this dangerous game, convinced they were the ones holding the winning hand. One of the most fascinating aspects of Cold War strategy was the idea of escalation dominance. The US wanted to make sure that if a nuclear war started, it would be one-sided in its outcome. That meant developing weapons so powerful and precise that they could cripple an enemy's ability to retaliate. It wasn't just about winning. It was about making sure the other side couldn't even get off the starting line. The goal was to control the narrative of destruction itself. Of course, all this planning didn't come without its share of absurdity. There were times when both sides almost crossed the line, like when the US accidentally sent a nuclear submarine on a secret mission that could have been mistaken for an attack, or when the Soviet Union launched a missile into the Pacific Ocean only to find out it was aimed at a weather balloon. These near misses remind us that the Cold War wasn't just about strategy. It was also about human error and the sheer chaos of nuclear brinkmanship. The United States has a long and complex history with nuclear weapons, but in recent years, the focus has shifted from deterrence to modernization. The 2018 Nuclear Posture Review, NPR, signed by President Donald Trump, marked a significant turning point in how the U.S. approaches its nuclear arsenal. This document not only reaffirmed the importance of maintaining a credible deterrent, but also introduced new capabilities designed to counter emerging threats, particularly from Russia. One of the most controversial aspects was the decision to develop low-yield nuclear weapons, which are smaller and less destructive than traditional warheads. Proponents argue that these weapons offer more flexibility in a conflict, while critics warn they could lower the threshold for using nuclear force, making escalation more likely. The 2018 NPR also emphasized the need to modernize existing nuclear systems, from intercontinental ballistic missiles, ICBMs, to submarine-launched ballistic missiles, SLBMs, and bombers. The U.S. military is investing heavily in new technologies like hypersonic weapons, which can travel at speeds that make them difficult to track or intercept. This push for innovation isn't just about keeping up with Russia. It's also a response to the growing nuclear capabilities of countries like China. But here's where things get tricky. While modernization ensures the U.S. remains technologically superior, it also raises questions about whether this arms race is truly necessary or if it could lead to an even more dangerous situation. Another key element of the current strategy is the emphasis on nuclear deterrence through a credible threat. The idea is that by maintaining a strong and visible nuclear arsenal, the U.S. can prevent adversaries from taking aggressive actions. This approach relies heavily on the concept of mutually assured destruction, MAD, where both sides know that any use of nuclear weapons would result in catastrophic retaliation. However, the 2018 NPR introduced a more nuanced version of this doctrine, one that acknowledges the need for strategic flexibility and the potential for limited nuclear options. In essence, it's like saying, we're not just here to blow things up, we're also here to make sure no one else gets the upper hand. While the U.S. strategy is often framed as a defensive measure, critics argue that its focus on modernization and new capabilities could be seen as provocative by Russia. The development of low-yield weapons, in particular, has been a point of contention, with Russian officials warning that such arms could lead to an unpredictable escalation scenario. On the other hand, the U.S. maintains that these weapons are necessary for deterrence in an era where nuclear threats are more diverse and sophisticated than ever before. This balancing act between reassurance and provocation is what makes the current strategy so complex and potentially dangerous. The implications of this strategy extend beyond just military planning. It affects international relations, arms control negotiations, and global security dynamics. By investing in new nuclear capabilities, the U.S. sends a message to its allies and adversaries alike about its commitment to national security. However, it also raises concerns about the stability of the global order and whether the pursuit of strategic superiority is worth the risk of unintended conflict. In short, the current U.S. nuclear strategy is a blend of tradition, innovation, and tension, one that keeps the world on edge while trying to maintain peace. So you're thinking, wait a second, nuclear war? That's not something we talk about in casual conversations, right? Well, here's the thing. Even though it's not something we want to imagine, the U.S. has some pretty elaborate plans for what happens if things get serious with Russia. One of these plans is called escalation and escalate then degrade. It sounds a bit like a game show, doesn't it? Like you're trying to win by making things worse until you finally make them better, except in this case, the stakes are way higher. Let's break it down. The idea behind escalation is that if Russia starts something, say, by launching missiles or invading Ukraine, the US would respond with a proportional but still massive counterattack. It's like when you're playing chess and you want to make sure your opponent knows exactly how serious you are. But here's where it gets tricky. Escalation can quickly spiral into full-blown nuclear war if both sides keep doubling down on their threats. Now, the escalate then degrade part is where things get even more complicated. Once the initial escalation has happened and the conflict seems to be reaching a boiling point, the US might take a step back. Literally. Instead of going all in with nuclear strikes, they could shift their focus to other forms of military pressure, like cyber attacks or economic sanctions. It's like saying, okay, we've made our point. Now let's see if you're willing to negotiate, but without actually negotiating. But why would the US even consider this strategy? Well, it's all about maintaining strategic advantage while trying to minimize loss. If they escalate too quickly and go full nuclear war, the consequences are unimaginable: millions of lives lost, environmental devastation, and global chaos. The idea is to make Russia think twice before pushing further by showing that the US has more than just nukes in its arsenal. Of course, this whole strategy is a bit like trying to play poker with a loaded deck. You have to know when to bet big and when to fold. It's not about winning at all costs. It's about ensuring that if you do end up in a nuclear conflict, it doesn't turn into an uncontrolled disaster. The hope is that by using this approach, the US can force Russia into a position where they have no choice but to back down or negotiate a deal that works for both sides.